before the world congeals into the separateness of matter, intention, and moral categories, before the hammering of meaning upon the anvil of time, there lies a singular tension, a pressure so dense and indistinct that it holds everything together, by sheer refusal to differentiate. This pressure is not chaos, nor is it order. It is not emptiness, nor is it fullness. It is an undivided field of potential, teetering at the cusp of its own fracture. What emerges from this primal state is not the universe as an event, but the universe as an obligation, a silent, unbearable imperative, coiled within the fabric of unbeing. In this strange, pre-ontological realm, ethics is not something practiced. It is something exhaled by the universe itself. It is not reactive, not the result of judgment or consequence, but primary and originary force inscribed in the very friction of existences, becoming. The moral dimension, then, does not arrive after the fact, handed down by gods or constructed by rational minds. Rather, it is the tension that generates the fact, the twist that rends unity into multiplicity, creating space for suffering, accountability, and ultimately, the possibility of meaning. This primordial field is not to be mistaken for a nihilistic nothingness or an abstract canvas of emptiness. It is an intensely charged stillness, one filled with latent force, dense with an almost unbearable yearning to become something. Here, there is no subject to perceive, no object to be perceived. There is no structure, no boundary, no definable entity, a continuum saturated with the ache of imminent transformation. But this ache is not aimless. It does not seek to express a desire in the way a formed creature might seek nourishment or kinship. Rather, it must break. It must differentiate. It must fracture. The ethical emerges not because something ought to be done, but because existence cannot remain undivided. The very pressure of being conformed contains within it an inevitable must, not as an imposition from beyond, but as a self-issued command. This is responsibility, not as a social construct, but as metaphysical tension. It is the obligation of the undivided to give way to division, to rend itself into the conditions under which things may exist at all. This is the first moral kindness, not justice, but rupture. The moment before difference, the still moment before form is inhabited by what can be called the binding twist, a fundamental talk within the uncreated whole. This is no metaphorical turn, it is a metaphysical event, though one that precedes both space and time. There is no actor, no observer. The twist has no center, because it is not yet centered. It is not in time, because time has not yet opened its mouth, and yet, from within this twist erupts the first echo of command, not from a deity or legislator, but from the sheer weight of undifferentiated potential grinding against itself. Obligation is born here not as a reaction, but as a generative event. It is not owed to anything, it is everything. It is the very act of becoming divided, of allowing form to emerge from formlessness. This twist is not violent in a destructive sense, but in an existential one. It is the violence of creation, the self-wounding necessity of differentiation, the primal guilt of being something instead of everything, or worse, instead of nothing. Here, morality is not a human institution. It is the first ontology. The universe is ethical before it is material, because the first event of existence is the painful inauguration of the ability to be wrong. Not wrong in action, but wrong in essence. The possibility of harm, of guilt, of deadfall, emerged because the undivided has torn itself open. This opening is not sin, but it carries the weight of sin within it. It is not crime, but it is the condition that makes crime possible. It is the terrible grandeur of existence being permitted. Conventional thinking places the moral realm downstream of existence. The moral agent arises from the self, which itself arises from consciousness, which in turn emerges from biological and physical processes. In this hierarchical model, the ought follows the is, but such sequencing is false. The pressure beneath all becoming suggests that the ought precedes the is, or more radically, that the ought is the is in its most primordial form, stretched to the limit. This primordial ought is not instructive. It does not prescribe action. Rather, it is the momentum of differentiation itself, the internal slope by which the unformed state strains toward form. It is obligation as force, not as rule, as topological curve, not as written command, number. One gives this order. There is no judge, and yet the command remains. It is the command to become, to fall from wholeness, to separate. In this, we confront the deepest horror and beauty of ethical existence, that our sense of duty is not added to us, but inherited from a trauma so foundational that it predates all identity. This sense of responsibility is not localized. It does not belong to a person, a group, or even a species. It belongs to being itself. Before there is a self to be held accountable, there is already accountability in the ear. The accountability of form to the formless, of the creature to the abyss that gave it breath. The formation of a self is not a triumph, but a compromise. A carving out from the whole that pays the price of guilt for the privilege of individuation. Human moral anguish, our guilt, our shame, our dread of obligation, is not simply a psychological response to external codes or internalized norms. It is the aftershock of a metaphysical cataclysm, the splitting of unity into the possibility of harm. Every ethical decision bears the trace of this ancient fracture. Every moment of being for another, every trembling before duty, carries within it the weight of a command that never needed to be spoken because it was already felt in the bones of the world. This is why morality feels imposed even when we rationally choose it. The must we feel in the presence of others, in the face of injustice or suffering, is not just a social construct or evolutionary residue, is a haunting. We are haunted by the original break, by the twist in the void that allowed us to become at all. And in becoming, we became liable. Not because of what we do, but because of what we are. Separated things, torn from unity, bound by the memory of the price of individuation. To understand this is to feel the scaffolding of the self tremble, not because it dissolves into nihilism, but because it reveals itself as secondary, as something that exists downstream of the pressure, so immense that it renders even the idea of choice a kind of echo. The moral command does not wait for us to be born. It precedes birth. It precedes matter. It is the condition that makes matter bearable at all. If ethics arises from this originary twist, then morality is not the path to meaning, but the residue of a trauma too vast to remember, and too intimate to forget. The terrifying beauty of this realization is that every action, every decision, every failure to act, is haunted by a responsibility that existed before action was possible. This is the tragedy of creation. Not that it leads to suffering, but that it begins with obligation. Before joy, before thought, before even differentiation, there is already the pressure to be something, and that pressure is ethical. Responsibility in this context is not a burden laid upon the self by external institutions or inherited beliefs. It is the ontological signature of having emerged at all. The self is not the foundation of moral agency, but the artifact of a deeper necessity, the necessity to fracture, to differentiate, to allow for relation, for failure, for harm. In other words, the self is not innocent. It carries the guilt of its own becoming, not because it sinned, but because it exists. This is the unbearable gift of life, to be given the chance to suffer under the weight of the first ethical command. To be born into a world where every breath is already an answer to a question no one asked, to a duty no one gave, but which was always already there twisting in the silent. Pressure before the world began, we like to imagine ourselves as moral agents acting within a structured world, choosing paths, bearing consequences. But beneath this illusion lies the deeper reality that our agency is itself a response, a reflex to a command embedded in the very structure of being. We do not choose to be ethical. We are already implicated, already accountable, already haunted by the weight of a responsibility that preceded our name, our voice, even our silence. The field from which all form arises is not neutral. It is charged, sloped, twisted by an internal demand to fracture. This fracture is not evil. It is not even choice. It is the only way that anything can come to be. But it brings with it the seed of ethics, not as an external system, but as the very logic of being. The twist demands becoming, and becoming demands responsibility. That is the cost of existing. To be is to be guilty not of crime, but of consequence. Not of action, but of arrival. We are not guilty for what we do. We are guilty because we are. And yet, this guilt is not a curse. It is the echo of the first and most terrible beauty, that the universe, in its unformed state, bore the weight of everything that could ever be, and broke itself open so that we could suffer, love, and answer a call that no voice ever spoke.
To read the raw excerpt discussed in this video, along with a more detailed analysis, please visit our Substack page at https://substack.com/@AETHYRICPHRONTISTERY. Link in bio.